Welcome to the Happy Mama Movement podcast. I'm Amy Taylor-Kabbaz, mama, journalist, coach, and founder of Mama Rising. This podcast is a space of community and collaboration. We gather stories of matrescence, motherhood, womanhood, and change told by our Mama Rising coaches and mothers around the globe, in the knowing that through our stories, we can begin to heal and change the way the world sees, values, and supports mothers everywhere. So, welcome to the Happy Mama Movement. Welcome back, everybody. After more than a decade of listening to stories of women around the world and how they feel about the way their babies were born, I know that so often we can feel judged or judge ourselves in how our babies arrived, especially if things didn't go to plan, and especially if you needed a cesarean in the end. What I want to say right from the beginning before you listen to this interview is the conversation you're about to hear around the rate of cesareans is different than what you may have heard before. Yes, we know that the rate of cesareans is often way too high in many places around the world, including in the United States, where my podcast interview is based. But more importantly, what this conversation shows is that we need to be thinking about the mother, the brand new mother who has just, perhaps suddenly and unexpectedly, gone through enormous surgery and is trying to process what just happened to her while recovering and also getting her head around matrescence and new motherhood. If we want to do this differently, we need to be honest about the realities of cesarean and what it means to recover and fully support and care for that new mother. The interview that you're about to hear is with Rachel Somerstein. She is an associate professor of journalism based in New York and is also the author of a new book called Invisible Labour, the Untold Story of the Cesarean Section. She is also a mama of two herself and kind of crash landed into this topic with her own experience of birth. Enjoy. And please share with everyone you know who is contemplating how to heal, is still trying to process how to heal and understand what she has just been through. This is the conversation we need to be having. Enjoy. Rachel, thank you for joining me on the podcast this week.
Thanks for having me.
Let's start with your experience of becoming a mother, and perhaps even before that, what you thought or what you expected becoming a mother to be like.
Well, I had what I now understand to be very misogynistic views, internalized misogynistic views about what motherhood was. I thought it was something I wanted to be a mother. Let me say that. I did want to be a mother, but I also wanted to be a successful, big ideas person. And I thought that those two things occupied completely separate spaces and that babies were boring and kids were boring and motherhood was sort of boring and fluffy and not serious and not about intelligence. And being with your kids can sometimes be boring. So I don't want to sound like that's not a true thing. But what I see now that I feel like I missed out on as a younger woman was the opportunity to recognize how totally exciting and brainy of an experience it could be to spend time with young children, to watch babies encounter the world, And then also in terms of the changes of pregnancy and the changes of becoming a mother, that obviously is an absolutely embodied experience, but that is a worthy enough experience to investigate, right? So I should say, like, I went to graduate school. I studied like serious stuff, and when I was in graduate school, embodiment was starting to be a worthy enough topic. But I really didn't come to any of this until I became a mother. And when I think back to opportunities I may have had to kind of, I guess, like, take motherhood seriously as it deserves to be, like, what I missed out. And I feel like I bought into this great lie that I considered myself a feminist, right? I mean, but I bought into this lie that motherhood is not a worthy enough intellectual topic and an embodied topic. Sorry about that.
Oh, thank you for starting with that. I totally resonate. And I think so many women, especially of our generation, we were encouraged to think about our lives in, a patriarchal way, really. Is that what you mean by internalized misogyny? Can you just, for everyone this might be the very first podcast episode of mine they're listening to, what do we mean by that?
Yes. So absolutely, this internalized patriarchal view of motherhood and babies too, as and that's what I mean by the internalized misogyny, as just like not the stuff of the big, wide, serious world, that the big brains were interested in more important topics and more important ideas, and that motherhood was like a intellectually flimsy thing that maybe got in the way of the big thinking.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that.
What a lie. I mean, what a crock. You know what I mean? And I believe that for 3 decades of my life,
Ditto, exactly. And particularly the way you talk about it in the sense of its worthiness, like its value and worthiness in terms of what you do with your life, the contribution you make. It is not made to feel important or worthy work. So how did that play out for you when you became a mother then?
So I'm a writer and I'm also a professor, and I had been working on a different project that was like a more academic project, traditionally academic project. And after I became a mother, I realized that, the way in which I became a mother, which was so difficult, but also so totally transformative, right? I'm not the same person I was before I became a mother, which I think is true for every single mother. You're not who you were. I realized that I needed to write about that, and that the book I was working on, which was about the obstacles photographers encounter when they take pictures and how that shapes what we see and how we remember. Those are important ideas. I'm still interested in them. I've written about them in other ways. But fundamentally, I thought, I'm like ignoring the elephant in the room, except it's not the elephant in the room. It's the most important thing in my life. And its history, right, of, for instance, C-sections, which has been totally overlooked, at least in, mainstream and actually mostly largely academic books, that deserved my attention. And I was interested in it. Why would I not follow my interest? Because I would assume it would just be, again, like, not worthy.
Mm. And so what was that like as a personal experience of becoming a mother and realizing that everything you thought about this was incorrect? What was that like on a personal level?
Well, it was like a slow dawning.
Mm.
And I did have some time where I realized I felt like I'd been like hoodwinked or something like that, but I'd participated in it myself, right? I can't say, it's not like I was like gaslit, right? Like I was part of this. And then it was also like the joy of seeing like what I was able to access now that I was a parent that I had not been able to access. It was like this entire realm of experience, and also these emotional registers that were always there, but were hidden from view for me. And I feel so profoundly lucky to be able to access that. And that's what motherhood gave me.
Mm-hmm.
And even it was something I think about sometimes, how children are able to, they don't filter things out. Like we filter things out all the time. And my son, who is 4, a few months ago, we were rushing to something and he was like, "Mama, do you hear the birds? Listen to the birds." And I didn't even notice that there was birdsong because I was like, "Okay, we're going here." And I just was like, I am so lucky that I have a person with me who hears that and wants to share that with me. It's like lifting a veil, and it's not about returning to childhood, right? It's about actually returning to presence.
Yes. Oh, what a beautiful way to describe it. I often say it's like you put on, there's that saying about you live your life through rose tinted glasses. I feel like there's like matrescence tinted glasses where suddenly everything you look at, it looks different. Everything you hear, everything, all the decisions you make, everything is from this lens of motherhood and how you've changed, but also how you see the world for them and through them. It can be,
Yes.
I don't know about you, but it sounds like it was the same. That totally surprised me. And I found myself almost feeling like a bit of a bad feminist. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Like suddenly my big, important career just didn't seem so damn important. And I actually did want to be there for all the tiny moments of hand holding and playing in the park. And like you said, there's absolutely boring moments in that as well. Mm-hmm. But it was such an internal battle to undo this belief within myself that was really hard and took a while to obviously process and understand.
I felt the exact same way. And I almost felt apologetic, first to the people around me, right, that I had changed.
So true.
And defensive about it, right? Like, sorry. And then I think 2 things changed for me. One is that we had the pandemic, right, which changed where you could be with your children when. And also I became a parent for the second time, with my son. And I realized how brief those windows are where you do get to spend the time in the park and they do want to hold your hand and all of these things. And I was like, I'm just like, this is so much more important than my job. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's, and I felt less apologetic about it. But I too felt like a bad feminist in the past when I would meet women who didn't work outside the home. And I would sort of be like, boring, just like this internal judgment. And that was so wrong, And then there's the whole, like, being a working mother outside of the home and a mother who doesn't work outside the home. It creates a divide because you can't hang out in the same way. I mean, I remember becoming friendly with these moms who didn't work outside the home and I literally couldn't hang with them. I'm like, I actually can't meet you on a Tuesday at 10 o'clock in the morning in the park, but I actually kind of want to. So that's real. I mean, there is that real division. And yet I was like, I have underestimated these people for, again, my entire life.
Yeah.
And feminism is the having the power to choose, right? Really, that you could do that or work outside the home.
It wasn't always painted that way to us, though, was it? It was more, yeah. And so in your work then, you decided to focus on cesarean. So you've done a lot of different work around motherhood, but share with us in particular why this area of becoming a mother was such a big passion for you.
So I had a pretty traumatizing C-section. So that was the personal impetus. The other impetus of it was thinking that, C-sections, we talk about them, at least the way that I encountered talking about them when I was pregnant for the first time, was how do we avoid them? So one was this personal reason that I'd had this traumatizing C-section. And then the other reason was that the way that I had encountered C-sections when I was pregnant was how to avoid them. And that focused specifically on avoiding the so-called cascade of interventions. So during labor, right? Like don't get an epidural maybe, or don't have your water broken, or all of these things that can lead as a domino effect to a C-section. whether or not that's true is actually another question, right? There's like research asking about that. But what I felt was really overlooked was what happens after that. So then let's say you do have a C-section. The cascade of consequences culminated in a C-section, or it didn't, some other reasons did. That's where the stuff gets really interesting for mothers. And in terms of shaping the future of your motherhood, it shapes the future of your reproductive organs, right? If you've had a C-section, you're more likely to have a hysterectomy later in your life. It can be harder to get pregnant again. If you do get pregnant, then you are more likely to have a higher risk pregnancy. It's associated with miscarriage, like all of these things that are so important in just shaping your future as a mother and as a woman and a person with the uterus, completely under discussed, and in a way that devalues, I felt like the mother. It's just like the emphasis then is on like, how did your baby get here, as opposed to, okay, if you go down this road, it is going to shape your future, and that doesn't have to be bad, but let's follow that, as opposed to, okay, make sure you get everything right during labor, and if you don't, well, too bad for you. You messed up or whatever. It wasn't the right outcome, as opposed to, this is the outcome. What's next?
And in that, there is also a level of judgment for ourselves that is not acknowledged or spoken about as well. We often, and I've been, listening to mums for more than a decade, and they will always very quickly tip into gratitude. Well, at least everybody's healthy and I have my baby in my arms. And similarly to what we do by ignoring matrescence, by ignoring the reality of that process, that enormous surgery, the ongoing effects as you talk about, and instead just, bypassing it really by saying, well, at least you're all healthy and you're all here. That is such a disservice to the experience that she's had as well.
Absolutely. I mean, everybody wants a healthy baby. That's why you go through pregnancy. And, I sometimes think like, well, actually to have a healthy baby, you also need a healthy mother. I mean, there's ample evidence of that, right? If you're dealing with postpartum depression, for instance, that hurts you and it hurts your baby. Like, to say that that's enough, first of all, it puts too much pressure on the motherhood aspect and on the baby, and it ignores what the mother has been through, and it makes it seem like your body doesn't matter. I mean, like you said, you've gone through this major invasive surgery, you're in pain, it's hard to move around, whether you needed the surgery or not, that's all true. And now you have to take care of a newborn 24 hours a day. Wow. What you really need is someone to be like, how can I help you? Or let me bring over dinner, as opposed to, well, your feelings don't really matter because the baby's fine.
So what is it like in the United States of America when you have a cesarean?
Well, I would say that our health system is, in some ways, it's, we're excellent at emergencies. I can say that we are, if you have a really, you need that baby out right away, which is rare, right? Happens in less than 1% of cases. Boy, you're fortunate if you're able to be at at a really excellent hospital with phenomenal physicians who can get the baby out so quickly and save potentially 1 or 2 lives in doing that. What we're not good at, however, is taking care of people after the emergency. So here, typically, if you've had a C-section and you don't have complications afterwards, you will go home from the hospital. I think it's about 3 days, sometimes 4 days. And then that's sort of it. You'll go back and have a checkup maybe within the first week or 2 for your scar, to make sure it's healing okay, your incision. And then you have your 6-week follow-up appointment, and that's all. And it's simply not enough. I mean, it's not enough support for anybody, no matter how their baby is born. But, when you think about, okay, you're going home and now you have to take your baby to the pediatrician and you can't even pick up a car seat. So how do you get the baby in the car? There's no one coming to your home to help you. You always have to go out unless you're paying privately or your insurance will cover to bring in a lactation consultant. Or if you've had a home birth, which you obviously haven't if you had a C-section, but if you started out as a home birth, right, then the midwife will typically come and visit you. But the fact that you have to get up and get out of your house to seek help, and that typically that has to be associated with some kind of big problem, right? Like, I think I have an infection, or I have some really bad headaches and I might have preeclampsia, or my baby, I don't know, is having some kind of an issue. And so it's important to be able to get that help, but you really need help at home. You need someone to be like, well, the way you've set up this changing table is actually going to cause you more pain. Let's see if we can set this up differently, right? Or like, how are you doing? Just someone to sit with you and ask how you're doing, and see you in your home environment, which reveals so much about how a person is really doing, what kind of support they have or don't.
I'm thinking, even if you just live in an apartment with stairs, like things like this, it's not spoken about or prepared. So when you leave the hospital, does anybody talk to you about that type of, setup when you get home? Were you warned? Was it explained to you? You need to make sure that your change table is on this height and you can't go up and down the stairs. Like, how much are we talking to them before we send them out to the wilderness?
So you're told to avoid stairs, and you're told to, hold like a pillow to your belly if you're going to be driving, and going over bumps, or if you cough. But this is really, we're so fractured, right? We don't have like a national system. So it really differs based on where you have your baby and who is in charge of discharge when you go home. You'll get a list of things. And again, the lists are more like, here are warning signs to look out for, if you have a fever, right, call the ER. If you see your incision is red, right, call. So there really is not, and again, this is what we're bad at, I think, overall in the United States, this preventative care, right? So, okay, somebody to say to you, this is how to set up the changing table, or here's how to safely open a dishwasher, which is very difficult to do if you've just had a C-section, or stand up from a sofa or something like that, or get out of bed. I think some nurses are really excellent at doing that, but not everybody is. And there's simply not enough care. It's like, okay, go home. Good luck. And we don't have paid family leave. So, I think that's another, I don't even know. It's the biggest shame. It's more than a shame. It's like, I was actually just talking to a person about this, that in the United States, when you have your baby is when you're at your poorest, because you work less and then you stop working when the baby's born and you're out of work, which is completely bonkers, both from the perspective of like, it's so expensive, right? You have these new expenses, and also that window of importance, both for the newborn, but for yourself. Like, if you think about matrescence, right, and you have the fewest financial resources at that time, it makes no sense. It's such a brief window in people's lives.
And if we don't support her through that time in a better way, the flow-on effects, I know you've looked into this, you said a little earlier about obviously the ongoing health implications of a cesarean, the future pregnancy, rates, etc., but also that mental health and massive process of obviously trying to come to terms with the fact that you're now a mother, which, I'm literally in the business of trying to figure out how we can prepare women better. And I still don't think we can ever really understand it until we're in it. But then if you've had, for example, an unplanned cesarean, you've got in your mind what you think those first few weeks are going to look like, when you think you're going to be able to go back to work, all the things that you had planned that are now suddenly changed. Like that, that actually hurts my heart to think that we have these beautiful new mamas who are not only trying to figure out the skills of mothering, but they are probably shell-shocked by what has just happened to them.
Absolutely. We do such a bad job of preparing people for that possibility. And that's one thing that I'm really hoping to change, which is, at least there's so much that can be done to make birth better and to prepare mothers for motherhood. And one of them is simply saying, okay, so in the event that you have a C-section, here are some things to have planned or set up or keep in mind for your recovery. And it's sort of strange. And this is another thing that brought me to the topic. It's like, this is 1 in 3 births in the United States. It's the most common operation in the world. But weirdly, we don't really talk about it. And just from a numbers perspective, it makes no sense. Right. And nobody, especially if it's unplanned, right? If it's planned, then okay, fine. This is what it's going to be like. You still maybe don't have the support that you need on the other side, but just going into your first pregnancy, preparing for motherhood, even in birth classes, it's not often discussed in a real way, right? Other than like, let's try to avoid that, or this is what you might have it happen. But what then happens after, like you're saying, how can we try the best as possible to prepare mothers so they aren't as shell-shocked as they currently seem to be?
1 in 3 in the United States.
Yes.
What are the insights around that figure? Are we overdoing it?
So there's really wide agreement that we're doing too many of them. And what's interesting is that we are doing the number of primary, so like C-sections for the first time, keeps going up. It's been going up since 2016. The only reason why the national figures aren't getting higher is that there's more VBAC, there's more vaginal birth after cesarean. Those numbers are also going up. And what so many leaders in reproductive medicine are saying now is that in the United States, the number we're doing is causing more harm than good. Whereas in other places in the world, we're doing too few. And so I want to say, like, that's so important that C-sections save lives. And we are so fortunate that we live in a time when they can be done relatively safely and expediently. And thank goodness, because we have the really sad evidence from places that don't have access to that kind of care. And we're just doing too many, and they create all kinds of knockdown effects.
And I know it's a complicated topic, but if we were just to have a look at why so many are happening in the States, is it a matter of just the reluctance to allow things to go slower than perhaps the hospital would like? Is it overly cautious medical practitioners? What do the stats tell us?
So it's both of those things. And it's also this sort of reliance on what's known as high-tech, low-touch care. So we're more likely to use things like electronic fetal monitoring because there's this belief in what it can tell us, right? It's technology. It's supposed to be objective, reliable. It's actually very problematic about what it can tell us. But it's, from a hospital's perspective, it's actually makes more sense economically, because with that kind of technology, you can have a nurse who's at the desk watching 2 people at once instead of being in the room with the mom. And when I talked to nurses who had worked in obstetrics before electronic fetal monitoring became so widespread, they were like, well, that's what happened. Like you used to be at the bedside and you were kind of working almost like the way we think of a doula now.
Yeah.
The whole time, right? Not just during pushing, the whole time. And that's not really the skill set. Now the skill set's about how to use technology. And that's wrapped up with both this financial imperative, this focus on efficiency and speed, and on real fear of being sued. I mean, obstetricians they're of all the specialists in the United States, they are sued the most often.
Wow.
Up to 80% of them, I think, have been sued, like, over the course of their careers. And there's the very real desire to prevent harm to a baby, because it's a lifetime of harm.
Yeah.
And, that's real. And so there's a saying, you don't get sued for the C-section that you did, you get sued for the one you didn't do. And there's also that very, I think, human component of, like, imagine if you're the provider, you're the clinician, and you see this monitor that's suggesting maybe the baby isn't doing so well. And especially if you're new, like the practitioners who, when they're more seasoned, they have more confidence, which you can totally understand. Especially if you're new, you would be like, I just don't want to take the risk. I mean, that's coming from a very human place. It's not coming from a bad place. So I think that's really important to remember,
Yeah, thank you for saying that. I agree. In the end, like I said at the beginning, we all want that beautiful, healthy baby here and a healthy mum as much as possible. And so what is the solution, Rachel? What do you feel with the current state of play in America? And it's similar to so many of the developed, the countries that I'm in, and we have a lot of listeners in the UK as well. How do we change this when we have to acknowledge that cesareans save babies and save lives? Mm-hmm. So perhaps there's a two-part answer here. One is, if you have a cesarean, if you need to have a cesarean, what can we do better for her? And secondly, what do you hope our medical system does around supporting birthing?
So I think what we can do better for her, first of all, is to take away the stigma from the operation. I definitely thought I would have a vaginal birth the first time, and I felt like I messed up or something, like I didn't do it right. I think that's so common, and we have to get rid of that. And we have to embrace mothers no matter how their babies arrive, and including adoptive mothers, right? Congratulations.
Yes.
So this is a transformation for you.
Mm-hmm.
Or IVF or anything. And so there's that component. I really think we need to have built into the hospitals physical therapy, occupational therapy. The mom who's had surgical birth, should be seeing these people as a matter of course.
I agree.
Absolutely. So I think those are things that we can change. And then also with real education about, okay, so this is what this is going to potentially mean if you decide you would like to get pregnant again. Here's some things to keep in mind. Here's how it can affect your pregnancies. Here's et cetera, or secondary infertility, just to be really open and frank, because I think sometimes people, if they struggle, let's say, to get pregnant again, there can be a lot of feeling of like blame, or am I broken, or, just to really remove that sense of individual responsibility. And then in terms of what we can do, I think, I mean, this sounds really, I have a pie in the sky answer and a more realistic one. The more realistic one is that we need to integrate midwives. I mean, we don't have that as our main provider, main kind of trained provider in the United States for women's health. There are obstetricians. Obstetricians are phenomenal. And we know that midwifery across the world is associated with better outcomes, including 100%. Lower C-section rates. Midwifery. But my pie in the sky answer is that we need to completely change our system so that we're focused on touch. And obstetricians can be focused on touch. Midwives can be focused on touch. Nurses can be focused on touch. And that would extend from, and community, I should say, touch and community. And that can start in pregnancy. So like, I think what's really exciting is group prenatal care. So you have like 10 moms, expecting mothers, who meet with their clinician for 2 hours. And the clinician can really go in depth and get to know the mothers and do real education, as opposed to seeing a bunch of people for like 10 minutes at a time. And then you get the community of other people who are expecting around the same time as you, which we're really missing that. That's something that modern life has cut us away from. And then thinking also about, again, like, how can obstetricians and midwives look to the past for the kinds of skills that they were once used to bring about healthy babies, in terms of hand skills, right? Like helping people into positions that would enable them to have vaginal births, or simply giving them time. I mean, you referred to that, right? Like this, like speed. Sometimes you need to sit on your hands and just sort of let the mother move around. Yes.
Yeah. I just recently got back from Kenya, where we visited a birth clinic who's really revolutionizing the way they're supporting mothers giving birth. And they every week have a class with pregnant mamas to be. And it's such a beautiful thing to witness. I'll share it on my social media when this podcast comes out as well. And the midwives are there teaching these mothers how to dance and sing their babies out, literally roll their hips in figure eights, and then use their voice to help, because apparently the throat and the pelvic floor are connected. So if you relax your jaw, your throat, and you sort of hum or sing, then the women that I was there with, we were all in tears, because if only somebody had shown me that.
Yes.
If only somebody had shown me to get up and move and sway my hips and squat and dance and sing. I mean, I was lucky. I did have all of the interventions and only just narrowly escaped from a cesarean. But it was an incredibly traumatic birth, and I was terrified and couldn't move. Like, I literally was just this scared, If only we just taught those skills alone, Rachel, I would imagine the different outcomes.
Absolutely. And what I love about you bringing that up is that sometimes when you talk about those kinds of skills, people would say things like, well, you really want to go back to this past where you didn't have antibiotics, or where women were dying in childbirth in large numbers. And it's like, no, nobody wants to go back there. And there are traditional techniques that have been completely swept aside because they're so-called not scientific, and they worked. And maybe now we actually have some understanding of why they worked, like you're talking about the relationship between the throat and the pelvis. But sometimes things work, we haven't quite studied why, but why wouldn't we try them? I mean, we go to Pitocin, and we go to the epidural, and we go to the monitoring, and those have a role. I'm not suggesting to get rid of them. And these other ways have worked for all of human history. So why don't we use them too? Why does it have to be this either or? And like you're saying, that those are like empowering ways for the mother to feel like, I'm participating in this.
That's right.
Yeah.
And then when I went into my second birth, just quickly, I knew these so much more. I knew all of those movements and everything. And I said, if in the end I still need a cesarean, then that's okay. You can cut my arms off if you need to have this baby. But I felt like I'd done everything that I could have, rather than this feeling of total disempowerment, total fear, total panic, and then that outcome. I think that also would change on the other side, wouldn't it? That if we felt like we were fully empowered and we still needed a cesarean, okay, that was what was the best outcome. But we have to feel like we have power in these moments.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Because if someone says, okay, we're here, this is it, we've tried everything, this is why we have this operation. That's why it has been developed. That's why people bothered with it. We wouldn't have it if we didn't need it. And you don't want to have these mothers feel like, well, this entire thing was done to me. Whether you end up with a C-section or a vaginal birth, like you're saying, either of those can be absolutely traumatizing and disempowering, and it doesn't have to be that way. And I would argue that probably most clinicians don't really want mothers to feel that way either. That's not what that's their goal. But that's like the practice as it's evolved, right? Is to seem like you're on an assembly line and you can be so easily dehumanized. But I think that becomes dehumanizing for clinicians too. And you don't go through medical school because you want to dehumanize people. That's where I've arrived. I used to be really mad at clinicians, because of all the bad stuff. And I am in a place with much greater empathy of like, they're in this system too. And their rates of burnout are quite high. And there are reasons for that. And we all really appreciate,
Yeah, I really appreciate your groundedness in this. I think to come to it with compassion for all involved. It's not working for anybody, really.
It's not working. Exactly.
Yeah. Thanks, Rachel. I will pop the link to your work in the show notes. And thank you for doing what you're doing. Let's hope for a better system. Thanks, as always, for being a part of our global matrescence community. Please take a moment and make sure you're subscribed to this podcast in your podcast player so you can always be notified of our next episode. And if you would like to work with a coach on your own experience of matrescence, please go to mummarising.net and explore our directory of phenomenal coaches, workshop leaders, space holders and facilitators around the globe. You can also explore our Global Matrescence Foundation and consider donating so a mama in need can access the support of one of our coaches and still ensure that our coaches receive the income and support they need so they can continue to work in this way. And finally, if you would like to be a coach, a facilitator, and a matrescence activist in your own community, jump on our waitlist for our next intake of the Mama Rising Facilitator Training at mamarising.net. Thank you for being here and being part of this movement. Until next week, bye.